You can start now, Sharad.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Sharad, and I'm a student of MA Psychology. And today I shall be describing to you theories such as a trait type theory of personality by Hans Eysenck. Okay. So a little bit about the background of Hans Eysenck. He was born on March 1916. He was a German-born British psychologist who spent his professional career in Great Britain. He is known for his work on intelligence and personality, and he received his PhD in 1940 from University College London. And he's written a lot of books, like a really lot of books, and the few books that I could actually, which are important according to his career, were the dimensions of personality, the scientific study of personality, and the structure of human personality. So when you're coming to the trait theories, how different is it from the type theories? Type theories are known to be discontinuous, whereas the trait theories are in a continuum. To understand the difference between type theory and a trait theory, so here's this slide which talks to you about whether the personality type refers to the psychological classification of different types of people, whereas the personality trait talks about different levels or degrees. So let's say when you're talking about type theories, you can classify them as being introverts or extroverts. But according to trait theories, it is actually on a scale. The extent to which somebody is an extrovert or the extent to which somebody is an introvert. Let's say a person in the office, a person doesn't talk too much, whereas let's say the same person in a place where he has a lot of friends, people he's comfortable with, he talks a little more. So basically, it's on a scale. That is what they describe personality trait as. So the goal of psychology is to predict behavior. And what he decided to do was to classify them as super traits, which we call types. And he decided that these accounted for most of the human behavior. And he compared this to Cattell. And Cattell is known for his psychometric research in interpersonal psychological structure. So he also explored personality and temperament and range of cognitive abilities and dynamic dimensions of motivation and emotion. So coming to the type theory of personality, how would you actually describe it? So type refers to categories that are distinct and discontinuous. For example, you look at this slide, look at Robert De Niro. He appears like a very, drab, very serious sort of person. But as you look at Eddie Murphy on the right, he seems like a very funny guy, always talking, always engaging with a lot of people, making a lot of people laugh. Okay, so when you're talking about trait, here he mentions that it appears in a continuum and it can coexist with other traits also. This is the same which I spoke about, which is the introversion factor. The trait can be on a continuum from introversion to extroversion. And most people cluster towards the middle. They're neither introverted nor extroverted. And there are few people who tilt towards the extremes. So in order to understand Hans Eysenck's theory, we have to understand the previous personality types and the popular theories of them. So these are the 4 humors based on personality types: Shelder's personality types, Ayurvedic body types, Jungian types based on temperament, type A and type B personalities, and J Block's 3 personality types. The ancient Greeks between the 2000 BC and the 0 AD, they classified the types of humor in people based on their body fluids. So let's say if a person has a character which is irritable and who's choleric, and you basically see the fluid, which is their bile, which is yellow bile, then they classify them as being agreeable. Whereas you consider somebody who's always optimistic and whose humor is, a sanguine, a happy kind of humor, and the fluid apparently, classifies him as blood, and he's more openness to experience. So their traits depend on how their humor is, how their characters, and how, how their fluid is. And this fluid probably is talking about bile. And coming to Sheldon's somatotype personality, they describe it as a classification of endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph. The endomorph is basically somebody who's sociable, tolerant, comfort-loving, and peaceful. And they apparently decided to correlate the person's body type with the behavior of the person. So the endomorph is generally plump and a little fat, whereas the mesomorph is somebody who's active, assertive, vigorous, and combative. And this is muscular. And the ectomorph is somebody who is restrained, non-assertive, sensitive. And the body type is lean, delicate, and poor muscles. So in the generally you don't see this sort of person of a particular type. There's always a combination of these types that you see around. So this is one picture that I found on the internet describing the different types of personality, that is endomorph, ectomorph, or mesomorph. So what Sheldon decided to do was he decided to give a particular degree, a rating of 1 to 7 based on whether somebody has a greater degree of ectomorph or a lesser degree of endomorph. And what the textbook talks about is, let's say a stereotypical basketball player, he's got a rating of ectomorph of 7 and an endomorph of 1 and a mesomorph of 1. Whereas somebody else who's, let's say Muhammad Ali, he's more of a mesomorph because he's got a rating of 7, an endomorph and ectomorph of rating of 1. So all of this is generally not used in psychology, but this is antecedent to how the theories develop later on. And this is generally seen in alternative therapies and Eastern psychology and spirituality. Now coming to closer home, how the Ayurvedic body types are classified, they're divided into Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So for example, Vata is somebody who's, has a light, thin build, who has dry skin, thin hair, who's generally nervous and anxious, who has irregular hunger and cannot tolerate cold weather and sleeps less. So all of this is based on externally how you perceive the person or how you observe the person. Whereas, for example, Kapha is somebody who's of a heavy build, who has oily and smooth skin, who has a calm mind, who's moderate hunger and cannot tolerate hot weather and oversleeps. So if you look at here, they're trying to make external observation on how the person is, but it points to a deeper seated, physiological basis, because all of these characteristics that you see here, hunger, cannot tolerate hot weather, oversleeps, are basically referring to some scientific indication of how his body is functioning. So from the inside to the outside, how his body is functioning inside to how he behaves outside. Now coming to the Jungian personality types, which we finally come closer to, this particular century. We divide the personality types into the traits into somebody having extroverted personality or an introverted personality, depending on whether the person recharges their energy with an external contact or activity, or somebody who gets recharged by spending time in his or her inner space. Does the person rely on the intuition, or does the person observe whatever is around them and sense it and then respond to it? So does somebody spend more time thinking and make decisions, or somebody make decisions based on how they're feeling? And somebody who tends to get organized, and set schedules in their life, that is, they judge what is to be done, or they leave the options open and see what happens next based on what they see in life. So using all of these letters, that is E, I, N, S, T, F, J, P, all of this indicated the 16 Jungian personality types. So linking a bit of medicine to personality types, somebody called Mayer Friedman gave this term of type A and type B personalities. So this person was a cardiologist, and while he was in his clinic, he made his patients sit in the sitting room where he put some sofas. So then he realized that patients who are very tense and impatient, they sat at the edge of the sofas, and that areas of the sofa became worn out. So then he realized that these patients were driven, impatient people, and were always, at the edge of the seats while they were waiting. So he labeled these people as type A personalities, and he characterized them as being workaholics, always busy, always impatient, and so on. Whereas the type B personalities, on the other hand, were laid back and easygoing. So this is also has some connection to medicine, because people who are ambitious, always driven, always trying to achieve goals and objectives, they have a greater tendency to have, a heart disease, or, or possibly of them having a heart attack later on. Then there was J. Block, who identified 3 personality types. That is somebody who's well-adjusted or resilient, somebody who's over-controlling, and somebody who's under-controlled. So the well-adjusted person is adaptable, flexible, and resourceful. The over-controlling is uptight, is a difficult to deal with person, somebody who's maybe a boss. And the under controlled person is somebody who's not boss material, maybe, who's impulsive, who's risky, and who does, criminal behavior, and, who has unsafe sex and all of that. So the criticism to these personality types was that it's too simple and it doesn't take into the consideration the multidimensional aspects and the continuous nature of the personality traits. So basically, why the type theory is being criticized is because it's oversimplistic and it overlooks the multidimensional and continuous nature of the personality traits. Now, finally, coming down to Eysenck's trait type theory. So what he suggested was that the personality is biologically determined and it belongs to a hierarchy consisting of types, traits, habitual responses, and specific responses. So Eysenck didn't like Freudian psychoanalysis and he thought that was unscientific. So the Eysenck's personality can be studied from either a temperamental aspect or a cognitive aspect. So what he decided to do is focus on the temperament aspect of personality in his Penn model. So what he decided to do was to basically, bring in a hierarchy and basically give names to the different types of traits that you see in the world. So he believed in a type of technique called fact analysis. So basically, for example, let's say you go to a restaurant and there is few things that you see around you, few things that you can classify in your brain and give them names. Okay, so let's say you go to the restaurant, as I mentioned, you wait for the food to come, you look at the cleanliness around you, you look at the staff behavior, then all of this comes into a broader heading called cleanliness. So you classify them according to, certain things in your head. Whereas let's say you're eating the food, you're feeling the taste of the food, you identify the temperature of the food, you see how fresh the food is, then you can classify them as quality. So this is known as fact analysis. So what he decided to do is to apply fact analysis on human behavior. So, and he realized that in human beings, these characters, traits should be measured by experiment, by rating or self-rating. So what he then decided to do is he looked at these traits, he looked at the factors, loadings, and he decided to better identify the trait clusters. So basically, he decided to put a number of traits together and call them a trait cluster. So coming to his Penn model, which is psychoticism, extroversion, and neuroticism model, he proposed a hierarchical classification of the personality containing 4 levels. So these superfactors and dimensions of personality were, at a right angles to each other, meaning they do not correlate with each other, but they, separately, have their own set of degrees. They have their own scales. Coming to extroversion. So extroversion is generally seen as somebody who, are high scorers. They have many friends. They need people around them to talk to. They like playing practical jokes on each other. They display a carefree, easy manner, and they have a high activity level. Neuroticism. Basically, neurotics are somebody who's a worrier, who's anxious and depressed. They have trouble sleeping, and they may have a lot of psychosomatic symptoms, and they may react too much to negative emotions. And psychoticism is seen as the high scorers who are solitary. They are often seen as cruel and inhumane, and they lack empathy, and they're insensitive to the pain and suffering of others. They're aggressive, and they have a little antisocial tendencies. So as I was talking about Eysenck's hierarchical model of personality, so each of this is based on a specific response level, a specific response to a particular thing that happens outside of them. The specific response can be grouped into a habitual response, and this habitual response can be classified into a trait. So sociability is one of the traits. So in a similar manner, impulsiveness, activity, liveliness, and excitability are all traits. So once you realize that all of these traits are there in a particular person, this can be grouped together as a person being an extrovert. So the type level is seen as an extroversion. So for example, the bottom level of the hierarchy, behaviors such as talking to a friend on a single occasion. A person who's talking with friends on multiple occasions are comprised of recurring behaviors. And the third level of hierarchy is sociability. And the top of the hierarchy are superfactors, which I just mentioned before. Here it's not, here it is seen as extroversion. So what Eysenck advocated was that the only three major dimensions of superfactors, that is the extroversion, introversion, emotional stability versus emotional instability, or psychoticism versus impulse control. The psychoticism versus impulse control came much later. He initially started with the first two. So the reason why he criticized Freud and he had his own philosophy of approaching this sort of theory was because he believed that the person or the human being has some genetic factors or inborn factors, and it needs to be discovered through physiological, neurological, and biochemical structure of the individuals. So here the physiological is, as I mentioned before, whether the person sweats a lot, or the person, doesn't sleep well, or the person doesn't eat well. And so he decided to approach it in a scientific manner, as trying to study the scientific, measurements that are there in the person. So every person may not have 100% or 0% of extroversion, neuroticism, or psychoticism. So the person may show some degree of superfactors, and the person may have high extroversion, moderate neuroticism, and low psychoticism. So to put things in perspective, so somebody who's got high extroversion, he may be sociable, popular, optimistic, whereas a person with low extroversion may be quiet, reserved, reliable. Somebody who's got high neuroticism may be anxious, worried, whereas a low neuroticism person may be calm, carefree, stable. Somebody who's got high psychoticism may be troublesome or uncooperative and socially withdrawn, whereas a person with low psychoticism may be socialized, empathetic and conventional. So Kozel, he decided to say, let's say, why would a person behave in a certain way? So that may be because of certain causes, which may be psychophysiological, hormonal, or the biological mechanisms. So he is basically trying to dig further and see why is a person behaving like this. And he decided to run scientific experiments to them. He proposed scientific experiments to uncover why they behave in a certain way. So then later on, according to his classification called a super trait, the degree to which a person is introverted or extroverted is related to how cortically aroused the person is. Cortex is basically the human brain. Basically, the surface of the human brain is covered with a lot of neurons, and the extent to which the cortex is aroused determines whether the person is an introvert or an extrovert. Now, how do you know whether the cortex of the person is aroused or not? You will find out using EEG. And EEG is nothing but measures the brain waves. So EEG stands for electroencephalogram. I think in 1982, he used the term arousal to identify what extremes the person is, excited. So if the person is on the lower extreme, if a person is sleeping, or whether the person is very excited, that is like upper extreme, or let's say the person is in a state of panic. So he believed that introverts are over-aroused, and therefore they are very sensitive to any stimulation that they get. So that's why, let's say an introverted person is pushed to a place where the person is not very comfortable with, let's say to speak in front of a crowd, or to be in a very uncomfortable situation, they tend to avoid such situations. So this is the EEG that I was talking to you about, basically small electrodes that they put on the surface of your brain. And this tends to pick up the electrical activity of your brain. And coming to what EEG is, it consists of about 4 waves generally, depending on the frequency of the electrical signals in your brain. That is the beta wave, the alpha wave, the theta wave, and the delta wave. So the beta wave is generally, seen in people who are active and have mental activity. Alpha wave is somebody who is awake and resting. Theta wave is seen in people who are sleeping, and delta wave is seen in people who are in deep sleep. Extroverts are generally under-aroused, meaning, nothing excites them so much. They actually, very chill people, so to speak. They are highly insensitive to any incoming stimulation. and they constantly look for situations that are going to excite them, meaning they appear like generally very bored, with everything that's happening around them. So he theorized that patients who are, in different degrees of stability, it reflects the degree to which the autonomic nervous system reacts to any external stimuli. Now, coming to what is an autonomic nervous system, to broadly speak, there are two parts of the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So let's say you're taking a walk and you come across a snake in front of you and you look at a snake in front of you. Okay. So what happens then? You start sweating, your heart starts beating faster. Okay. You get really worried. You can feel your, heart beating, like you can have palpitations and all of your muscles tense. So that is when your sympathetic system, goes into an overdrive. Okay. So for let's example, you are, going to sleep, you're listening to really good music, you've had a really nice shower, the temperature is really nice, and the weather is really good. So your heart slows down, your brain slows down, and you sleep really comfortably. That is known as the parasympathetic system. So he was saying that the neuroticism or how stable a person is depends on how this autonomic nervous system reacts to stimulus, that is the outside stimulus. So he linked this with the limbic system. Now the limbic system, I can explain that to you, is the feeling system, and this influences the motivation and emotional behavior. So what we understand the limbic system as, food, water, sex, which is basically the basic drives of the patient, of the person. So he's linking the autonomic system and the reaction to it to the limbic system. And he said that the people who are high on neuroticism, they tend to react more quickly to any painful, disturbing, or other stimulus than more stable persons. And these people also exhibit a more persistent reaction, even if the stimulus is disappeared and not in front of the person, they exhibit a continuous reaction to that stimulus, as compared to somebody who's very stable. So this neurophysiological interpretation of these dimensions of personality, he closely related to his theory of psychopathology. And if he looks at any person who comes to him or any mental health therapist with symptoms of disorders, these disorders are related to the personality traits and the nervous system functioning. So somebody who's on the higher side of introversion and neuroticism, they are more prone to develop anxiety disorders such as, phobias, obsessions, and compulsions. Whereas somebody who's high on the extroversion and neuroticism dimensions, they are at a risk for psychopathic disorders. And he said that these psychological disorders do not occur automatically because of some genetic predisposition. So this is another, medical, concept in which, let's say, heart disease is running in some families. Okay, so the thing is, heart disease as such will not occur in a person unless there are environmental factors that add to that, add to certain things in the person. So let's say the person, has a history. Let's say the granddad has a heart disease or the father has a heart disease. And then this person, doesn't do too much of exercise, doesn't have a good diet, is probably a type A personality, and, who doesn't, doesn't take care of exercise and stuff like that. They are more predisposed to heart problems. So that is an example of, an environmental factor and a genetic factor. So what he was also saying in terms of personality was that the person has, a genetic predisposition and an interaction with an environment can produce a psychological disorder. Now, coming to arousal theory by Eysenck, he was trying to explain extroversion in terms of cortical arousal via the ascending reticular activating system. So now, what is the ascending reticular activating system? So the thing about, in science, to define what consciousness is very difficult. So we just have theories of trying to explain what consciousness is, but we don't actually know what consciousness is. Okay, so coming to, if you look at this diagram, you see this is the brain, and below the brain, you can see the brain stem. So basically, let's say you are in communication with the environment. You can see, you can hear, you sit in a particular position, you know your balance. Okay, all of that information goes from the environment, to your nerves through the brainstem. And from the brainstem, whatever you can hear, it gets relayed to the cerebral cortex, meaning the nerves present in the surface of the brain. And this interaction between the brainstem and the consciousness, that is your the gray cells in the cortex and your memory, all of this integrated together is something that explains consciousness. So the seat of consciousness, from what we have theorized or hypothesized, is at the ascending reticular activating system. So what he was seeing is there are different levels of ascending reticular activating system activity. Introverts have a higher level of activity than extroverts. So they are more aroused than extroverts. And then later on, he based his theories on the Yerkes-Dodson law, where they suggest that arousal and performance have a U-shaped relationship. Okay, now what is a U-shaped relationship? The U-shaped relationship, according to Yerkes-Dodson law, it plots the performance of a person, whether weak performance or strong performance, with the arousal of the person, whether he's low aroused or highly aroused. If a person is lowly aroused, the person may be, fatigued or, sleepy. And if a person is very highly aroused, the person may describe, traits such as strong stress, anxiety, and impaired performance. Here in this inverted U-shaped graph, the person is optimally aroused when the person has, mid-aroused, and performance will be at the peak. Good performance, great performance if the person is moderately aroused, not too low and not too high. So he hypothesized that some intermediate level of arousal is optimum for performance. Now he also decided to explain neuroticism in terms of activation thresholds in the sympathetic nervous system. So as I mentioned before, what sympathetic nervous system? Just remember walking on a path and then seeing a snake. So the visceral brain, basically the raw brain, so to speak, the limbic system, it consists of the hippocampus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and these regulate things such as emotional states such as sex, fear, and aggression. It is responsible for the fight or flight response in the face of a danger. So as I mentioned before, when you're walking on the road and then you see a snake, you either fight the snake or you run away from the snake as fast as possible. That is a flight response. So this is associated with the sympathetic nervous system. So finding the heart rate of the person, the blood pressure, the sweating of the person, breathing rate and muscle tension, all of this measures the activation levels of the visceral brain. That is, indirectly you measure what is happening to the limbic system. So the amygdala we keep on talking about. This is just a diagram to show you where it is located. This is like the surface of the brain. This is the medulla. This is the cortex, and then it's seated right here. So he's identified that the neurotic individuals have a greater activation levels and lower thresholds within the visceral brain. They're easily upset when they face minor stressors, whereas emotionally stable people are calm under stressors because they have lesser activation levels and higher thresholds. After you've seen all of what can happen in the amygdala and in the cortex, he decided to move on to understanding the gonadal hormones, basically testosterone and the hormones related to the adrenal glands, that is near over the kidneys. So he decided to biologically explain psychoticism in terms of hormones such as testosterone and enzymes such as monoamine oxidase. So, let's say picture a masculine human male who has a lot of testosterone. So what happens then is what breaks down the sex hormones.
Please continue, Sharath. Sorry
okay.
for the...
It's fine, it's fine. So monoamine oxidase is an enzyme. So what generally happens in the human body is you have hormones, you have proteins, you have neurotransmitters, And all of these need to be broken down and recycled and get back to the neurons, get back to the nerves and start firing again in order to cause a few changes in the body. So the enzymes are the ones that break down these molecules. So what he found out and what he reported was that people who have low platelet monoamine oxidase was found in psychotic patients. And he kind of hypothesized, saying that a person with a low activity of this enzyme may be related to how vulnerable they are later on. A little bit to explain what monoamine oxidase are. Now, how do psychiatrists treat depression? One of them is through giving medicines and drugs. And what do these drugs target? Serotonin, melatonin, norepinephrine, epinephrine. So basically, these are the chemicals, these are the transmitters that maintain whether you fall into depression or not. So what monoamine oxidase does, monoamine oxidase A, known as MAOA, they break down these molecules. So how these psychiatrists treat it is, they prevent the breakdown of these molecules by inhibiting this enzyme, that is preventing this enzyme from acting. So for example, a person with a high or low levels of this enzyme, that is the monoamine oxidase, they are associated with schizophrenia, depression, attention deficit disorder, and substance abuse. And as I was telling you, the monoamine oxidase inhibitors are one of the major classes of drugs prescribed for the treatment of depression. So his model, that is the PEN model, has contributed to the study of personality in 3 ways. That is, it combines the descriptive aspects of the personality and the causal aspects of the personality. That is describing a person and then finding out why a person has a particular personality by doing all of these tests and all of these investigations and all of that. And it also provides causal explanations on, in addition to the description of personality. And the PEN model is supported by credible evidence. Because of these researches that has been done, now you have evidence that such behavior exists because of some biochemical or physiological or neurological problem. So the PEN model, it proposes a hierarchy of 4 levels, and it makes a clear distinction amongst these levels. And it is the most compelling because of its experimental approach to the study of personality, because it can be testable. So in science, every time a theory is out, it needs to be tested. So him bringing out the PEN model made it testable, unlike Freud. And the PEN model is more likely to generate specific predictions about the personality. And like I said before, the habitual responses, the traits are composed of habitual responses, and which are in turn derived from specific responses. And the trait of sociability correlates with the response predictions such as activity, liveliness, and assertiveness. So to taken together, all these traits together forms a super trait, and this is what Eysenck calls extroversion. So as I said before, the type refers to dimensions of personality, and so basically a person who's, the type concept of extroversion, the person may be less extroverted or more extroverted. A person may, be on extremes or maybe in between. And so of course, I'm a little unclear about this part when it comes to talking about type and trait personalities. So what methods did he use to identify the personality types? He used a variety of methods such as self-reports, observer ratings, biographical information, assessment of the physique and physiology, and objective physiological tests. And all of these data they are fact analyzed to determine the structure of personality. So as I said before, he initially came out with extroversion, introversion, and neuroticism stability. In 1976, he decided to add a 3rd dimension of personality called psychoticism and superior ego strength. And people who have a high on this super trait, they tend to be egocentric, impulsive, and sensitive to others. And they're often seen as troublesome, not fitting well with others, and intentionally upsetting people. So when he suggested that psychoticism has a genetic predisposition, so certain genes involved to determine whether a person will be psychotic or psychopathic. And he also regarded psychoticism as a personality continuum. And he also said that this trait is found more in men than women. He also developed the Eysenck personality questionnaire. And there's a lot of self-report questionnaires to assess the individual differences along with the 3 super trait dimensions. So this Eysenck's personality questionnaire, it is aimed at detecting how likely is a person to fake responses in order to look good. And there's a junior EPQ test which has been constructed for use in children between the age of 7 and 15. And a number of review studies have also been done. They've found out that extroverts have greater tolerance for pain than introverts. They engage in more talk and have more coffee breaks than introverts. And if they are excited or stimulated by the environment, it enhances their performance. Whereas the introverts, they prefer, theoretical and scientific vocations such as engineering and chemistry. Extroverts prefer people-oriented jobs. Introverts are reported to have more frequent masturbation as compared to extroverts, whereas extroverts are more outgoing that way. And introverts attain higher grades in college than extroverts. So basically, these are all review studies. I'm sure all of this, there are more studies happening, in this area. And the students who generally withdraw from college for psychiatric reasons, they are generally introverts, whereas those who withdraw for academic reasons tend to be extroverts. Introverts have a higher arousal levels in the morning, whereas extroverts have a higher arousal levels in the evening. Introverts work better in the morning, extroverts work better in the evening. So basically just a group of studies, coming down to broad conclusions. As I said before, the differences between introverts and extroverts is how sensitive they are to stimulation. So there was one test known as the lemon drop test by Corcoran in 1964. While 4 drops of lemon juice are placed on a person's tongue, they found out that introverts excrete almost twice the amount of saliva as extroverts. And he also proposed that this ascending reticular activating system in the brainstem, that is responsible for controlling the differences in response to stimulation between introverts and extroverted subjects. So that's it about my topic on Hans Eysenck from the IGONU textbook in personality types. I came across this picture, which talks about to what extent a person has unstable emotions and stable emotions, to what extent the person has an introverted personality and an extroverted personality. And depending on the previous studies in the same, whether the person is melancholic, choleric, sanguine, basically happy, or phlegmatic. So thank you. My topic ends here. Are you guys there? Are you sleeping?